You're standing in a Roman forum holding a small piece of copper, and 5 grown men are watching you very carefully. In front of you is a man holding a set of bronze scales. His job title is libripens, and he's here to make what you're about to do legally binding. You strike the scale with the copper. You say the words, and in that moment, you don't pledge your farm. You don't pledge your oxen, or your house, or your grain. You pledge you. The contract is called nexum, the oldest form of borrowing in Rome. It's also the reason that if this harvest fails, a stranger can legally chain you up in his own house with a minimum of 15 pounds of iron, feed you porridge, haul you into a crowded market 3 times to have your debt shouted at strangers, and then invite other creditors to cut pieces off you. That last part is real. We'll get to it. It's stranger than you think. So let's fail that harvest. The good news is Rome doesn't come for you immediately. The 12 tables, Rome's founding law code, carved around 451 BC, give you 30 days of grace. 30 days to find money that doesn't exist. You try the neighbors, who owe money too. You try selling the plow, which means next year you're standing right back here. Nobody in your village has coins. They have chickens. On day 31, your creditor comes and touches you. That's the legal term, manus iniexio, the laying on of hands. He grabs you and drags you before the praetor, and exactly one thing can save you, a vindex. A third party willing to step forward and swear the claim is wrong and to owe double if he loses. So you scan the crowd for a friend brave enough to bet twice your debt on you. Nobody moves, they never do. The praetor speaks a word and you become addictus, assigned, not sold, not sentenced, handed over. You are now, in Roman law, an item delivered to its owner. Rome had lawyers before it had plumbing. Your creditor takes you home. Not to a state prison, Rome barely has those yet. He takes you to his own. Rich Romans kept lockups attached to their houses. The nastier version was an ergastulum, a work pit, often half underground, windows set too high to reach. We know how carefully they were maintained because a Roman farming writer, Columella, tells landowners to inspect them regularly to check the inmates are properly chained and the cells secure. That's not a horror story, that's a management tip. The law says you can be held in stocks or chains weighing not less than 15 pounds or more if he desires. A Roman pound is about 327 grams, so roughly 5 kilos of iron is the floor. There's no ceiling. Your creditor is legally invited to be creative. Food is your problem. If you can't feed yourself, he owes you 1 pound of far-course emigrants a day. Not bread, not meat, just enough to keep a body operational for 60 days. 60 days is your window, and during it, you get taken out 3 times. Rome runs on Nundinae market days, every 8th day, when the countryside pours into the city to trade. The loudest, most crowded moment in Roman public life. That's when they bring you out. They march you to the assembly ground in your chains, and someone stands beside you and announces the sum you owe, out loud, to farmers, butchers, gossips, your wife's cousins, and every person you will ever have to look at again. Then they take you back to the pit. 8 days later, they do it again. 8 days after that, a third time. Rome has just used you as public infrastructure. You're a debt notice with a face, an advertisement, posted in the busiest place available for what happens to people who fail. Because on that third market day, the 60 days run out. If nobody has redeemed you and nobody has the law, allows 2 outcomes. You can be put to death, or you can be sold into slavery trans Tiberum, across the Tiber. Not because the far bank is worse, because of a technicality so Roman, it's almost beautiful. A Roman citizen cannot be enslaved inside the Roman community. So they walk you over the boundary first and sell you there, where the rule doesn't apply. Rome didn't break its own principles. It just moved you outside them. And now, the line I promised you. The Latin reads, Tertus Nundinis partis secanto, on the third market day, let them cut pieces. If several creditors have a claim on you, they cut their shares. Here's where I'd rather be honest than dramatic. Scholars have proposed at least 5 readings. Divide his property, divide the money from his sale, divide his goods, simply claim shares, or cut the body. The uncomfortable detail is which reading the Romans themselves preferred. The old writers took it to mean cutting up the debtor. We know they argued about it. The writer Aulus Gellius records a philosopher recoiling at the idea, asking what could be more savage than a poor debtor's limbs being butchered and sold. And in that same discussion, the answer arrives. Nobody could name a single case where it had ever actually been done. So the likeliest truth is this: the clause was real, it stayed in the law, everyone knew the words, and it was never used. It didn't have to be. A threat you never carry out is free, and the state never needed to dismember one farmer as long as every farmer had heard the sentence. You, meanwhile, are still chained in a basement, and you're about to become political. Around 495 BC, an old man ran into the forum. His clothes were filthy. He was pale, half dead with hunger, his hair and beard wild enough to make him look feral. Then the crowd got close and recognized him, a decorated soldier, a centurion. His story came out in pieces. He'd served Rome while the enemy burned his farm. The taxes came anyway. The debt came after that. And the marks on his back weren't all from war. Some were from a creditor's whip. The forum lost its mind. What followed was the first great walkout in Roman history. The plebeians left the city, refused to fight, and stayed gone until they got their own officials, the tribunes of the plebes, with power to block the state. Rome's constitution didn't grow out of philosophy, it grew out of debt. The debt riots that followed kept happening for generations. Nobody disputes that part. Roughly 326 BC, a youth named Gaius Publilius is pledged as nexus for his father's debt, handed over, like you were, as a living payment. His creditor doesn't want money, he wants the boy. Publilius refuses, so the man strips him and has him flogged not for a debt, for saying no. He runs into the street bleeding, and Rome doesn't just get angry, Rome gets specific. Out of this comes the Lex Poetelia, the law that supposedly ends debt bondage for good, moving liability from the debtor's body to his property. The famous end of the horror. Except it isn't. The sources can't agree on the year, but they agree on what came after. Bonded labor didn't vanish. A court could still assign an insolvent debtor to his creditor. It just changed paperwork. Rome kept the machinery. It just stopped bragging about it. Which brings us to Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, and the single most Roman thing in this story. Manlius was a hero, the patrician, who saved the capital from a night attack by the Gauls. Then he watched a centurion dragged off to prison for debt and paid it himself. Then he sold his own estate to free others. Then he stood up and accused the Senate of stealing public money. They charged him with wanting to be king. At his trial, they moved the assembly outside the city walls, specifically so the jurors couldn't see the capital he'd saved while they voted. Then they threw him off the Tarpeian Rock, a drop of 20-odd meters onto stone, leveled his house, and banned any patrician from living on the site. And his own family swore no Manlius would ever be named Marcus again. In Rome, being in debt was dangerous. Helping people out of debt was fatal. By the late Republic, the chains mostly gave way to arithmetic, which is somehow worse, because arithmetic never gets tired. The legal ceiling was 1% a month. Rome had a name for what happened above that slang for 2 times over, 3 times, 5 times. Cato the Elder, one of the most respected men in Rome, was once asked how he rated moneylending as a business. He asked how you'd rate murder. That's not a joke a culture tells about something it approves of. And yet senators did it anyway. Banned from large-scale lending directly, they lent through frontmen instead. The business went underground. The sneering continued. Want the perfect example? Marcus Junius Brutus, the liberator, the man from the Ides of March. Brutus lent money to the town of Salamis in Cyprus at 48%, 4 times the legal limit through agents. So his name stayed clean. When the town couldn't pay, his agent got himself a cavalry command, besieged the town senators inside their own council building, and several starved to death. The governor who uncovered it was Cicero, appalled, who refused to enforce the raid. Brutus had already arranged a Senate decree making his illegal contract valid. By 63 BC, debt had become an insurgency. Catiline built his conspiracy out of the ruined, bankrupt aristocrats, businessmen wrecked by interest, veterans with no land. His slogan was Tabulae Novae, new tablets, wipe the records. And at the exact same time, the men at the top were drowning in debt, on purpose. Julius Caesar owed 1,300 talents before he'd held major office, a talent being the big money unit of the ancient world, a lump of silver worth roughly 6,000 days' wages for a skilled worker. When he tried to leave for Spain, his creditors blocked him until Crassus stood surety for 830 talents. Mark Antony worked in the smaller everyday currency, instead the sestertius, the coin Romans actually shopped and got paid in. He ran up 6 million sesterces before he was 30 and had to flee to Greece. For comparison, a legionary earned 900 sesterces a year. Antony's debt alone was worth more than 6,000 years of a soldier's pay, which exposes the real rule. A few hundred sesterces could cost a farmer his freedom. 6 million made you interesting. Small debts enslaved the borrower, enormous debts enslaved the lender. Crassus couldn't afford to let Caesar fail. Same law, same city, completely different species of consequence. Under the emperors, it finally softened. A debtor could surrender his goods voluntarily, escape prison and disgrace, and keep the bare necessities of life, the direct ancestor of modern bankruptcy. And in AD 33, when a credit panic hit and land prices collapsed and everyone called in loans at once, Tiberius pushed 100 million sesterces into the banks as interest-free 3-year loans. An ancient bailout. Though before anyone gets carried away, comparing it to 2008, as some economists carefully do, a single senator's wealth qualification was 1 million sesterces. Substantial, not staggering. And here's the part that gets me. We know these people's names. Buried in ash and mud, wax tablets survived. A man called Gaius Novius Eunice, acknowledging 1,250 sesterces borrowed from an emperor's slave, sworn on oath to Jupiter with a penalty of 20 sesterces for each day he ran late. A banker in Pompeii, whose strongbox held 153 tablets, auction, receipts, loans, a woman named Umbritia Ianuaria collecting 11,000 sesterces, one transaction of roughly 38,000. 40 years of a soldier's pay, enough to buy 8 human beings. Because that's what Rome finally decided debt was. Not chains, not the iron, not the pit, not the parade, paperwork, names written down and kept in a box. Rome stopped threatening to cut debtors into pieces. It kept the other part, the sum read out loud in front of everyone you know, the name on the list, the disgrace that outlives the debt. We kept that part too. And if you think Romans were reckless about what they signed, wait until you see what they were willing to swallow. For centuries, people ate a ground-up Egyptian pharaoh on purpose, as medicine, at the dinner table. That video's on screen now. Everything we ate before we knew better one was a dead pharaoh.